You think you master one thing and then something else changes, new channel comes up, people use things in a different way that's unexpected. And so there's never any mastery, and it's exhausting. And the sense of being out of control is something that companies have to struggle with continually, because you realize that you never have been in control once you start doing this. Your customers always had the ability to say whatever they wanted, do whatever they wanted, you just couldn't hear them. Now you can hear them, and they're very loud sometimes, and they're sometimes very negative. But just as often, sometimes they're also very positive. I think we are just at the very beginning of this journey. And the journey isn't about technologies, it's about this. It's about how do you actually give up control, because you never had control in the first place. That's the first step. And the second step is then, how do you actually be in command of the situation, be able to interact, be able to be engaged. And the only way you can do that is to understand and use these tools in the way that they could potentially be used. So what I'm going to talk about today is how do you actually create a strategy around this. Then we're going to talk about how to organize, how to lead, and then finally how to prepare, and then we'll open up for questions. A strategy is simply your plan of how you're going to accomplish some goal. And the strategy itself is what you would do to accomplish that goal, but just as importantly, what you will not do. A classic Michael Porter definition of what strategy is, right? So let's look at, when it comes to social media and social technologies, I think that there are 4 goals, that big categories of things that help me think about this. And they are, you can learn with customers and from customers, you can have dialogue with them, you can support them, and you can innovate with them too. So the things that I'm talking about here, these technologies all exist today. They're all technologies that I actually use on a fairly regular basis. But nobody has tied it all together for me into these new experiences. So you ask me what's new? None of this stuff is really new. And these technologies like RFID, NFCs, geolocations, they've all been around for, in some cases, decades. But we haven't actually put it to use in terms of saying how could the relationship improve because of that. A couple other ways to be learning. This is an engagement pyramid. We call it social graphics, that allows you to understand how your customers are engaging with content, with products and services in your area. So at the very bottom are, for example, the people who are watching, reading, listening to social media content. One level above that are people who are sharing the content that they actually read, listen, and watch. Now, what's interesting is sharing is the first level of visible engagement that you can detect. And curating is at the very top of that pyramid when you are looking at creating and curating content, aggregating it together, being an editor for a particular audience. Now, I do have some data for this market also in Brazil. You can see that watching, again, quite a few number of people are doing this. Almost everybody who's online is reading, listening to, and watching some sort of media content being produced by people. Many people are sharing also. Not everyone is commenting and producing, but you can see the numbers in Brazil. It's actually much higher than other countries like Mexico, UK, and the United States. There are a couple reasons for this across the population. Everything from, again, this is a society that just shares a lot in general. Just the culture has been built up with the social networking history that's been here for much longer than other countries. And also because of the language. So dialogue is something that marketers think we do oftentimes, but we don't, because this is what marketing looks like today. It's really shouting at people. It's using a megaphone, reaching as many people as you can, saying it as loudly and as clearly as possible, hopefully. And if people didn't hear it the first time, you're going to increase the reach and the frequency. Because that's what traditional media is about. It's not to say it's bad, but given the proliferation of channels, your ability to reach mass is going down, and that one-way medium is starting to lose its effectiveness. So this is not the future in many ways. It's still an important part, but the new developments are very different. The way that marketing has to be done now. The new normal is actually not about crafting messages, it's about crafting conversations. Now you know this, you participate in this, you do it on a daily basis, but how do you have a conversation? How do you plan a conversation? The reality is, You can begin to think what the conversation will be about, but you really don't know all the curves and twists and turns, and you don't know what the final destination is going to be. And that's really hard, because in marketing, you're usually expecting that if I run this campaign, this message, I know at the end I'm going to have so many people buy my product, right? You're not necessarily guaranteed that at the end of the conversation, because you don't know where it's going to happen to it. It might get railroaded into a completely different direction. The other thing that's different is that it's very human. It's very personal, not corporate. It's not a press release. It's not a website. It is not a formal presentation to investors. It's a very different type of conversation. And the third thing is that it's very continuous. Many times when you think of marketing campaigns go on for 6 weeks and they come down after 6 weeks. You plan for a certain period in time for beginning and end, and you measure the results. You may do some fine-tuning along the way, but it's beginning, middle, and end. With conversations, with dialogue, it never ends. It just continues to evolve. There may be life cycles that you have in that relationship, but because that dialogue is forming a relationship, it continues to grow over time. You would not necessarily begin a relationship with somebody and then say, I'm going to go away now. We're just going to have this for 6 weeks, and then we'll come back in 6 months. That's not a relationship. And yet, so many people are still using social media as a traditional marketing channel. They think, oh, 750 million people on Facebook, I can go reach, I can do mass with that. And so they do the traditional things of message or corporate voice and episodic. But that just doesn't work, because that's not what this medium is good for. So I encourage you to think about, inside your company, do you think about support, again, as a cost center? Is something that you have to do to keep customers happy? Or is it something that you think very strategically about and say, how can I use support as an opportunity to deepen that relationship in ways that I could never have thought before? This is not new social technology, whiz-bang, Twitter, Foursquare, Google Plus kind of stuff. This is stuff that has been around for 30 years. But it's about the way you apply it inside your organization that makes a difference. In Brazil, again, one of the things that's been astounding is how quickly Twitter has taken off. We talked about Facebook. How many of you are using Twitter on a regular basis? A show of hands. Okay, so about a little more than a third, almost half of you are. That's really high, because it's about 24-25% of the online population right now, as you know. So Twitter actually went through this past spring and localized many of its interfaces, and Brazilian Portuguese was one of them, because Brazil has the second most number of people on Twitter after the US. So very, very high penetration. And I think it's really shown, especially in some key areas. One thing here with Avianca, the airline, they have a Facebook page, but they're also very integrated into many different Twitter channels. They have 1, 2, 3 different channels for Avianca. And it's because they realize that these are 3 different types of relationships that people would have. So how many of you have ever traveled to Avianca and had a problem? You have to go and find, many times, right? So who do you go? Do you call? Do you tweet? Do you go to Facebook? Now they say, whatever you choose, we will be there. So they see this as support, true support, customer support, in terms of saying, if this is the way you prefer to get your problem resolved, we'll be here for you. So we'll go on and talk about preparedness, 4 things that you need to do and keep in mind. The first one, most importantly, is that as you're thinking about your social strategy, keep in mind your most important strategic goals for your company, for your department. Whatever it is that you're trying to achieve, make it strategic. The last thing you want to be doing is, what should our Facebook strategy be? That's a technology-driven approach. That doesn't work, because, well, why are you doing this in the first place? So pick one of your most important strategic goals. Every executive has maybe 3 or 5 goals that you care about. Pick one of those and say, how does social media help achieve that? Using the objectives of learn, dialogue, support, and innovate. And then start small. Start with something, but make it significant. Make it count. Just because it's small, it doesn't mean that it's not important. The reason why I say choose something that's strategic and important to the organization is that this is hard work. Giving up control, learning how to have dialogue, it requires that you have a lot of courage, and that doesn't come easily. So if you're going to ask people to do something, make it important so that they will put effort behind it. The second thing is to have a culture of sharing. As an organization, as business people, we are awful at sharing. We tend to do just the opposite, which is hoard information, hoard decision making, and not share it because we think that's what's going to get us ahead. Just the opposite is actually going to happen. A good open leader will facilitate sharing. So, and you can't share just on a spur. You have to develop a habit of that and develop a culture of that internally, really internally, before you can do it externally very, very well. The third thing is to be very disciplined about how you do this. This is the time of ad hoc social media that only one or two people know how to do this. It's in their heads, they just kind of go and execute. Those days are over because ad hoc walks out the door, walks out on vacation, leaves the company, and your relationships go with them. You can't afford to do that. This is strategic. So what are the processes you have? This is from the US Air Force. When a message comes in from the social media, they determine whether it's positive or it's negative. It's positive, it follows this triage chart. If it's negative, it goes in this way. Now you have this for phone calls, you have this for email, you need this for social media too. You absolutely need to because it's your customer relationship. So make sure that no matter where that relationship goes inside your organization, that it has a place, that problems can be resolved, that suggestions have a place where they can live and get responded to. And the fourth area is probably the hardest thing, is you have to master the art of failure. You're laughing at this. This is very near and dear to your heart, isn't it? Because failure is something, mistakes, failures, whatever you want to call them, that's part of relationships. No relationship is perfect. And your ability to admit when something is wrong, have that authentic and transparent conversation and relationship is so crucial to building trust. Trust has to be there for a relationship to flourish. So most companies are horrible at this. They have to pretend that relationships are all perfect, and they're not. And I believe that you will gain so much more if you can have that open and honest conversation with your customers, with your employees, with your partners.